Welcome to this deep dive. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you've just built a massive, state-of-the-art, practically impenetrable bank vault.
Oh, I love a good vault metaphor.
Right. So you've spared absolutely no expense. You've got biometric retinal scanners at the entrance, complex time locks on the heavy steel door, and a web of invisible laser grids covering every square inch of the interior.
Sounds like an absolute fortress.
It is. It's a total fortress. But right next to that massive vault door, stuck to the wall, is a bright yellow sticky note.
No.
Yeah. And on that sticky note is written the master override code.
Let me guess, for emergencies.
Exactly. Left there for the floor manager, just in case they're running late or there's a fire drill or something.
Which completely invalidates the vault. I mean, you basically just have a very expensive, very secure-looking hallway at that point.
Exactly. Well, today we're talking about the digital equivalent of that sticky note.
The emergency bypass.
The emergency bypass. We're looking at a really fascinating use case from the GRC PROS series, which, if you follow this space, is basically a masterclass in governance, risk, and compliance framework.
It really is.
Specifically, we're zooming in on part 5. It's titled Controlling Production Change in Crypto-Critical Systems.
Right.
So in simple terms, we want to figure out how companies manage those emergency backdoors in their most critical systems, what we call Tier 0 environments.
The absolute crown jewels.
Yes, the mission-critical infrastructure. If Tier 0 goes down or gets compromised, the whole company is in catastrophic trouble.
So our mission for this deep dive is to look really closely at the control setters.
The people defining the rules.
Right. We're moving beyond the standard automated delivery controls, your retinal scanners and your laser grids, and we are looking directly at those bypass paths, the sticky notes. We want to figure out exactly how to govern the highly privileged actions that can rewrite, bypass, or completely sidestep security controls in these Tier 0 environments. What's fascinating here is that in these crypto platforms, we are dealing with systems where the impact of a single change is immediate and compounding.
Immediate impact.
Yeah, unlike a traditional software bug where, say, a button might not load on a website, if someone pushes a bad update or malicious code in a crypto-critical system, it instantly impacts funds movement.
Wow.
We're talking about live deposits, withdrawals, transaction execution paths. It impacts signing authority like vault access paths and signing gateways, and it fundamentally threatens financial truth, the core balance calculations and ledger posting.
So there's zero margin for error.
None. So if an identity, whether that's a human systems administrator or an automated service account, can just bypass the rules during a perceived emergency, your entire control system is merely an illusion.
It's just theater.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how good your automated scanners are if someone can just flip a switch and turn them off when they feel like it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because there is a very stark contrast between the standard control model we usually think about and the incredibly messy reality that this research exposes.
Oh, it gets very messy.
Right. In a standard model, you have CI/CD, continuous integration, and continuous delivery. You can think of CI/CD as a highly automated, strictly monitored assembly line for code.
A very strict assembly line.
Yeah, you have pre-merge controls preventing bad code from being approved. You have build controls stopping risky inputs, and deploy controls restricting who can actually push that code to the live production environment. But the research asks a very difficult question. Why do these automated assembly lines actually fail in the real world?
And the answers are so wonderfully, frustratingly human.
They really are.
It's almost never a grand cinematic conspiracy. It is usually just people trying to do their jobs under intense pressure.
Right. It's a massive incident happening at 3 a.m. And the engineering team says, we just need to ship this patch right now to stop the bleeding, skip the security scan.
Yeah, the ship it now, scan it later mentality.
Exactly. Or it's a huge infrastructure migration where a team promises, well, we'll harden this later. We just need to get it working for Monday.
Which never happens.
Never happens. Sometimes it's platform drift where someone argues that their specific repository is totally different, or they're using legacy tooling. And my personal favorite, the high privilege excuse.
Yes. Administrators can always override.
Administrators can always override. What we found looking through this research is that in crypto-critical systems, these bypass paths are not rare edge cases. They are the default failure mode.
And that leads us directly into a concept known as the assurance trap.
The assurance trap.
Yeah, and it's a terrifying position for any organization to find itself in. Imagine the board of directors or executive leadership asks the security team, Are our Tier 0 services consistently protected everywhere?
Right. A simple yes or no question.
But the assurance trap means that the honest answer to that question isn't a simple yes. The honest, uncomfortable answer is, it depends on who is on call and how urgent the salvation is.
Yikes. That is not what a board wants to hear.
Not at all. Most crypto organizations already have branch protections, required peer reviews, and automated scanners. But governance often only protects the happy path.
The day-to-day operations.
Right. The mainline everyday delivery path is secure, but the bypass paths are completely ungoverned. Branch protections might exist on paper, but if a lead engineer can override them silently, your assurance is basically zero.
I really want you, the listener, to think about your own workplace for a minute. Think about how often a temporary exception granted during a stressful outage suddenly just becomes the permanent new normal.
A quick fix.
Yeah, a quick fix to get the system back online quietly turns into standard operating procedure. This analysis specifically warns against these kinds of exceptions, the ones that don't have a strict expiration date or that lack any sort of compensating controls to monitor the system while the vault door is wedged open.
Exactly. If the people who set the controls, the control setters, aren't governed themselves, then your delivery controls are nothing more than policy theater.
Policy theater.
You might have strict rules, but if a developer can modify the automated assembly line templates without secondary review, or swap the trust boundaries on your build servers, the controls are conditional on everyone's good behavior, not actual system enforcement.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because bypass isn't just one vague, abstract concept floating around the network. It doesn't live everywhere.
No, it's very specific.
It lives across a small, highly specific number of surfaces.
Right.
Understanding these specific bypass surfaces is crucial because this is where the risk actually lives.
Let's break them down.
Yeah, let's walk through them, starting right at the beginning, where the code actually lives. Number one is Git governance.
The repository.
The repository. It is essentially the digital filing cabinet where all the blueprints for the software are kept. Git governance is the place where required checks magically become optional.
This is a huge one.
We are talking about the people who have the power to edit branch protection rules, or the people who can literally mark a failing security scan as not required, so they can force a code merge through anyway.
And the crucial governance point here is that if your repository administrators are not governed, your Tier 0 merge gates are not actually gates.
Yep.
They're just polite suggestions.
Polite suggestions.
Exactly. If an admin can push code directly to a protected branch without a pull request, without another human being reviewing and approving that code, you simply do not have a controlled system.
Okay, so if Git governance is about protecting the code repository itself, what happens once that code actually leaves the repo?
Then it hits the pipeline.
Right. Which brings us to surface number two, CI pipeline definitions. The automated assembly line we talked about earlier. This is where the security gates themselves are defined. I'm talking about someone going in and editing the actual workflow files, like the .github/workflows directory.
The actual instructions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you can change the pipeline's instructions, you can simply tell the pipeline to skip the security scan entirely.
Which is why the analysis emphasizes treating CI definitions exactly like you treat production impacting code. They shouldn't be treated as background configuration files.
Right. If it's a Tier 0 system, any changes to the pipeline itself require the absolute highest level of scrutiny.
Now, this next area caught me off guard because it's such a massive blind spot. We spend so much time looking at the code and the pipeline rules, but what about the actual machine doing the building? Surface number 3, runner and agent trust.
This is critical. Imagine an attacker doesn't bother hacking your code. Instead, they hack the machine that packages your code.
Which is terrifying.
It is. If your Tier 0 job runs on a shared server where another team was previously testing an insecure experimental application, an attacker can inject malware right as the code compiles.
Just slipping it in at the last second.
Yes. If runner registration is open to broad groups of engineers, the integrity of the build is completely compromised. A compromised runner completely defeats your code scanning and your peer review because the runner can just maliciously alter the code right before it's shipped. Moving further down that automated assembly line, we hit the actual deployment phase. Surface number 4, continuous delivery and environment protections. This is where entry into the live, customer-facing environment is governed.
The final gate.
The final gate. The bypass here happens when someone simply disables the protected environment approvals, or they add an alternate unmonitored deployment path because the main one is, acting up.
Right, because production protections are the last line of defense. If they can be turned off casually by a frustrated engineer who just wants to go to sleep, then your Tier 0 integrity is purely conditional.
Conditional on their patience.
Yes, it relies on nobody ever having a bad day.
Then there's the human element. Surface number 5. Production deploy roles and secret contexts. This is all about identity becoming the bypass. There's a deeply sobering reality highlighted in this research. If an engineer can deploy from a laptop with production credentials, your continuous delivery controls are completely cosmetic.
It's a harsh truth, but entirely accurate. If you have broad membership in production deploy roles, or long-lived static credentials sitting on developers' laptops just in case they need to do emergency administrative work,
The sticky notes.
the sticky notes, yes, then your beautiful, highly audited deployment pipelines are totally irrelevant. Someone can just bypass the pipeline and push from their local machine.
And finally, what happens when someone bypasses the entire assembly line completely? Surface number 6. Side door promotion paths. This is where what is actually running in live production stops matching what was reviewed back in the pull request.
This is the Wild West.
Yeah, we're talking about manual artifact pushes directly to the production registry, or using a direct command line tool like Cubecle to force changes directly into the live cluster outside the pipeline entirely.
And the reality there is, if you cannot constrain the promotion path, if people can just walk around the metal detectors and use a side door, you simply cannot defend the system's integrity. It's that simple.
So what does this all mean? We've outlined a fairly terrifying landscape of sticky note overrides. How do we actually fix this without completely paralyzing an engineering team when they are in the middle of a genuine hair-on-fire production outage?
Because the outages will happen.
Right. At the end of the day, they still need to be able to fix things quickly when they break.
The framework provides a very clear path forward by defining 5 testable control objectives. These are the what must be true statements for the organization. And for each objective, we can clearly see the common failure mode the trap organizations fall into when they get it wrong.
Let's break those down.
Yeah.
First, we have to look at the repository rules themselves. Objective 1 is that Tier 0 repo rule changes must be governed and provable. You have to restrict who can edit the protections, and you need immutable audit logs for any changes.
And the common failure mode there is that controls technically exist on paper, but they are completely mutable.
Right.
Any repo admin can change them on a whim without any secondary review or alert firing.
Building on that, we need to secure the pipeline rules. Objective 2. Pipeline definition changes need elevated review. If you are changing the shared templates or the CI workflows, it requires what we call code owner approval.
Yes.
A code owner is essentially the designated expert or security team that strictly owns that specific piece of critical architecture.
The failure mode we see constantly here is teams getting frustrated by a failing security gate, so they just edit the workflow to skip the gate entirely so they can ship their feature on time.
Then we have to address those build environments we just talked about. Objective 3 dictates that Tier 0 jobs must only run on governed runner pools with tightly defined trust boundaries.
And the failure mode here is pure convenience. Tier 0 jobs end up intermittently executing on generic shared runners because it's faster, or the dedicated pool was busy, which completely breaks the trust boundary.
When it comes to actually pushing to production, Objective 4 tackles deployments. Production deploys must be absolutely constrained to controlled identities and pre-approved pathways.
Which prevents the classic failure mode where a highly privileged emergency role slowly turns into a shadow deployment path.
Oh, yeah.
Developers start using the emergency access every day just to avoid the friction of the standard process.
And perhaps the most crucial cultural shift in the entire framework, Objective 5. Break glass is time-bound, approved, and reviewed. The framework acknowledges that bypass can and will exist, but only through a strictly governed exception process.
Exactly. The failure mode here is that break glass just becomes how we ship. Exceptions are granted during a major incident and they never ever expire. The sticky note stays on the vault door forever.
So how does an organization systematically sequence this? How do you actually build this?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the research lays out a secure bypass governance blueprint, and it relies on a sequencing principle built around 3 truth moments.
The 3 truth moments.
Yes. The governance has to happen before bypass is possible, when bypass is used, and after bypass is used.
Let's look at that when bypass is used moment, because this introduces the formal break glass concept. I want to make this super clear for you listening. The goal of this blueprint is not to ban emergency bypasses.
Banning them is impossible.
Right, banning them is impossible because complex systems break and need immediate fixing. The goal is to make those emergency paths legitimate rather than ad hoc panicked workarounds. There are very specific requirements for a legitimate break glass event. First, it requires a formal ticket ID outlining exactly what is happening and why.
A paper trail.
A paper trail. Second, it requires a hard expiry time. The door closes automatically. Third, it needs explicit dual approval from both security and the Tier 0 service owner. Fourth, it requires compensating controls, extra monitoring while the vault door is open. And finally, a mandatory post-use review to ensure the system's control state was fully restored.
Think about how drastically that changes the entire culture of emergency response in an engineering organization.
It's night and day.
Instead of an ad hoc panic where everyone is just blindly handing out administrator credentials to put out a fire, it becomes a predictable, provable system. It acknowledges that emergencies happen, but it demands that we handle them with the exact same rigor that we apply to our standard code deployments.
Right, so how is this actually operationalized? Because it's one thing to have a great blueprint on a whiteboard, it's another to get hundreds of engineers to actually follow it.
That's the real challenge.
The framework details a very strict standard operating procedure, or SOP, cadence. Weekly, the security and engineering teams are reviewing all bypass events and scanning for any control drift. Monthly, they are sampling the Tier 0 repositories to verify that protections are still mathematically in place. And I love this specific detail. Monthly, they do a proof retrieval drill.
That is such a great drill.
They have to prove they can pull the forensic evidence of a governed bypass in minutes, not hours. Then, quarterly, they do privileged access reviews to actively reduce privilege creep, removing access from people who no longer need it.
And to actually roll this out without causing complete cultural chaos, the implementation is broken into 4 phases. Phases 1 and 2 are foundation and build. This is where you are mapping the territory, inventorying who currently has access, defining what bypass requires, implementing those code owners, and physically separating those Tier 0 runner pools from the rest of the network.
Phase 3 is validate, and I think this is fascinating. The security team actively attempts controlled tests. They will intentionally try to change Tier 0 protections without approval, or try to run a critical job on an unapproved runner, or attempt a side door deployment using command line tools.
They're attacking their own systems.
Yeah. They do this specifically to ensure that the attempt fails, or at the very least triggers a massive, unignorable alert. They're actively testing the vault's laser grids while the bank is open. And then phase 4 is operate, where they fully automate that drift detection and start publishing metrics on bypass trends to leadership.
But of course, implementing all of this requires significant time, engineering effort, and money.
Right, which brings us to the business case. Why should executive leadership actually fund this initiative?
Leadership has to fund this because without it, your delivery controls are incredibly strong on paper, but completely inconsistent in reality. Unmanaged bypass is a structural property of systems that have incident-driven decision-making and highly privileged administrators.
It's built in.
It is. If you don't aggressively manage it, the organization pays for it in hidden risk debt. You end up with prolonged, painful audits because you can't quickly prove to regulators who changed what, and ultimately, you face a significantly higher probability of catastrophic financial or data loss events.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We started by looking at the illusion of perfect CI/CD pipelines, the comfortable idea that our automated gates will save us from all harm. Then we acknowledged the very messy, very human reality of emergency bypasses, those sticky notes on the vault door, and how they completely undermine those automated gates.
And the risk that brings.
Right. Finally, we walk through a structured blueprint that takes that messy reality and makes bypass enforceable, time-bound, and provable across 6 very specific technical surfaces. For leadership, the ultimate takeaway here, the true criteria for success, is being able to stand in front of a strict auditor or a board of directors and credibly mathematically say that Tier 0 controls cannot be bypassed without explicit authorization, durable forensic evidence, and an enforced expiry.
This raises an important question. We've talked entirely about internal human engineers today. We've talked about people making panic decisions at 3 a.m.
Yeah, sleep-deprived humans.
Right. But what happens when an AI agent or an automated infrastructure healing system is the one trying to pull a break glass override?
Oh, wow.
As our systems get smarter and more autonomous, if machines are monitoring our machines and a machine detects a critical failure, how do we govern a purely algorithmic sticky note? Can an AI be a code owner? It completely shifts the paradigm of who or what we are actually governing.
That is a wild and incredibly important thought to leave on. As the landscape shifts, the definition of identity shifts right along with it. I want you to look at your own team's emergency procedures this week. Ask yourself, when the pressure is on and the system is down, is your break glass path truly governed? Or is it just an open side door waiting for anyone human or machine to walk through? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.